Good evening. When one looks at the 10 plagues that afflicted the Egyptians during the Exodus story, one notices a pattern, a very simple one. They seem to go from bad to worse. The first plague, blood, might be viewed as sort of a minor inconvenience. Fresh potable water, according to the Medrash, could still be obtained by digging wells near the Nile. Frogs were surely more difficult to handle because of all the racket they made. They must have made life very difficult for the Egyptians. Lice was a greater intrusion on a person's body. By the time we get to wild animals, though, plagues of livestock, boils, and a meteor like hail, things are really getting bad. The locusts were clearly devastating, plague number 8, because it finished off whatever was left of Egyptian agriculture. But by the time we get to the 9th plague of darkness, we begin to wonder, is it so terrible to sit in the dark? It didn't involve any physical pain or destruction of property. Surely it was frightening, but why was it number 9? It should have been one of the earlier ones, perhaps, because it seems to be going back to a lesser type of a plague. The answer, I believe, is that darkness should be considered the worst of them all until that point. Why? Because, think about it, what happened to them when they were sitting in the dark? Human beings thrive because of their social connections with their fellow man. We need to share our joys, our sadness, our triumphs and tribulations with our families, our neighbors, and even strangers off of the street. If we become incapacitated by a thick darkness of choshech, we find ourselves in the depths of loneliness. And that, my friends, is much worse than any physical pain or financial ruin. How many of us ourselves are lonely or know people who are alone? The Choshech imposed a rigid and horrifying isolation on the Egyptians. As the Torah says, Lo ra'u ish et achiv. They could not see a man and his neighbor. That's the point. All communications between people ceased. The Egyptians suddenly had no family, no friends, no enemies. He was completely and utterly blocked out of society. How awful. What a plague. Not to compare, God forbid. But if we look at our own society, and how has it changed recently as a result of the coronavirus? Being quarantined just a little, and with all of the advances of computers, has driven many people completely off their rockers. Many of us are willing to take a chance on their very lives. And unfortunately, sometimes it has even cost them their lives, rather than be alone. So they take their chances. They'll go to synagogue or base medrash, weddings, bar mitzvahs, or any of the normal social interactions, which are so much a part of our normal lives. We are experiencing not only a plague of corona, but also a plague of choshech, of darkness. And yet, I would like to suggest that perhaps it was not really a plague at all. It may have been something else. You see, there was a silver lining in this plague. Perhaps it was a golden opportunity. It presented the Egyptians with some much-needed solitude, a moment of self-introspection, of allowing the Egyptians an opportunity to rethink their priorities, perhaps to finally reject and abolish the evil of slavery once and for all. Certain things in life, after all, require a modicum of solitude, of removing oneself from the hustle and bustle of the powerful streams of life, and to take a moment and think. Sometimes our greatest innovations, scientific discoveries, inventions, occur in the still of the night. Solitude does have its advantages. To quote Longfellow, not in the clamor of the crowded street, not in the shouts and plaudits of the throng, but in ourselves, our triumph and defeat. Ironically, many people tell me that their kavanah in prayer has been greatly improved by davening alone. No distractions, no having to pace yourself with the frenetic pace of the chazan. Just you and the Ribbono Shel Olam. What could be better? Well, I'm not suggesting, God forbid, that we abolish the institution of minyan, because ultimately true prayer can only be fully expressed if it includes our neighbors, our fellow humans, as well as the cooperation of the public davening as one whole. The pasuk says, Elohim nitzav ba'adat el. If you want to know where God rests his presence, where his appearance can be felt, it is whenever there is a minyan. The point is that being alone can be a good thing if it teaches us how to behave once we're back in society. So which is it? Was this darkness, this choshech, a plague, or perhaps a much-needed respite? The answer is, as in many aspects of Jewish law, it is a machlokes, a debate. The Medrash on our Parsha tells us, Mehechen haya hachoshech. What is the source? Where did this darkness come from? Rabbi Nehemiah gives a credible answer. Mechoshech shel Gehenam, from the darkness of hell. A lonely place indeed. Incredibly, however, Rabbi Yehuda suggests a different answer. Mechoshech shel Ma'ala, Shne'emar Yoshis Choshech Sisro. It is not from the depths of hell at all. Rather, it comes from the darkness of God. As it says, God's abode is choshech, darkness. Whether it was from heaven or hell is moot, because it really depends on how the individual Egyptian, reacted to that darkness. Indeed, the Torah tells us, Gam Eirav Rav ala itam, that a mixed multitude of Egyptians also left Egypt. Perhaps they were the ones who recognized in the silence a golden opportunity. In contrast, sadly, it says, Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim, that many Israelites were not interested in the redemption. They were perfectly happy remaining slaves, and many of them died during the week of the plague of darkness. Choshech was at once a terrible and intense plague, but for some, it was a salvation. It was an opportunity to turn their lives around and be worthy of redemption themselves. Shabbat Shalom.